All right. So again, glad for everyone being here this evening. We're doing a study of the tabernacle, the priests, and the offerings. And there's a lot of things that we can go over when we study this particular subject. Go ahead and turn your Bibles over to Hebrews chapter 8. Hebrews chapter 8 is where we're going to begin. I know that this is where we began last time, but it's important as we kind of introduce this. I want to read this passage each time before we study. But when we're going over the tabernacle and the priest and the offerings, there is so much detail given, so much detail that God gives in how He wants things done. He will give specific measurements to things. He will say, you need to give it this many cubits wide, this many cubits high, this many cubits in length, all of that. And He's being very specific. And one of the things He's going to say is make sure you do all things according to the pattern. And that means that they needed to do it as God regulated, as God had said it. If God said 3 cubits, you don't do 2.5, or you don't do 3.25 and say, well, close enough. You do it according to what God said. You try making a house, for example, against a pattern. You say, well, this is close enough, 3 feet here, and this is close enough to 2.5 feet, even though it calls for 2 feet. 2.5 feet is good enough. Well, you're going to end up with possibly a house that's lopsided. And so God's being very specific, and they needed to follow His specific instructions. In Hebrews chapter 8, it says, beginning in verse 1, now the main point and what has been said is this: we have such a high priest who has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister in the sanctuary and in the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched, not man. For every high priest is appointed to offer both gifts and sacrifices. So it is necessary that this high priest also have something to offer. Now, if he were on earth, he would not be a priest at all, since there are those who offer the gifts according to the law, who serve a copy and a shadow of the heavenly things. Just as Moses was warned by God when he was about to erect the tabernacle, for see, he says, that you make all things according to the pattern which was shown you on the mountain. They needed to do it exactly as God had said and not deviate from that. But when you're looking at this, it goes to show that those things of the Old Testament, especially the tabernacle, the priests, the offerings that are going to take place, and what you're going to see is a description for those in Leviticus. These foreshadow Christ. And we're going to see that in our study. We've seen that a little bit already from our previous class last week. As we continue through this, let's just give a brief review. When we're going through the tabernacle, when we're going through this, remember it was an ark. There was an ark in that one room, the Holy of Holies, or the most holy place, made of acacia wood. Again, that acacia wood, this was a strong wood. This was stronger than white oak. This was a very strong wood. And in other words, this was built to last for a little bit. And when you look at acacia wood, the trees that acacia came from, acacia trees, often had thorns on them. There may be a few exceptions, but often the acacia trees had thorns on them. And I find that interesting because Christ wore a crown of thorns when he was crucified. And so maybe that's kind of pointing to that event, foreshadowing that. As you move on from there, again, this ark was made overlaid with pure gold. It's going to be made with acacia wood, gold on it. This was going to be a heavy piece of furniture, for lack of a better word, furnishing for the tabernacle. It's overlaid with pure gold. Poles of acacia wood were going to be used to carry this thing, and they were going to overlay them with gold. And it says, you shall put into the ark the testimony which I shall give to you. In other words, this would be the Ten Commandments, the tablets of stone. And last week, I know that I had you read, someone here read Leviticus, not Leviticus, but Exodus chapter 23 and verse 16 by mistake. Uh, Sometimes when I'm writing things down and you're typing things out, you write down the wrong chapter. But what I should have had us read was chapter 32 and verse 16 in Exodus. Could someone read for us real quick? Exodus chapter 32, verse 16.
Verse 16.
Verse 16 of Exodus 32. Yes.
And the tables were the work of God, and the writing was written the writing of God, David on the tablets.
And so what we see right there is God, these were from God, written by God on the tablets. And so just wanted to make that point clear. Now, we also see that that was one of the things put into the ark. We see that some of the manna from prior to the Ten Commandments, back when God had set up kind of a pre-law of Moses Sabbath day in Exodus chapter 16. What ended up happening was there was that God was going to test the Israelites. He said, we're going to have a Sabbath day, and there's going to be manna, and you do not go back out to get that manna on the Sabbath day. What did they do? They went back out to get the manna. And so, but some of that manna that was there was going to be put into a jar and then put into the ark. Same thing with Aaron's rod. We see that as well. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 4, I believe, says that all three of those were in the ark. Hebrews 9, verse 4 says, having a golden altar of incense and an ark of the ark of the covenant, covered on all sides with gold, in which was a golden jar holding the manna, and Aaron's rod which budded, and the tables of the covenant. And that might be a I'll have to double check, but that might be that might need to say tablets. Should say tablets, possibly. I'll have to double check on that. But again, this is going to have the old covenant, it's going to have the Ten Commandments in it. It's going to have the manna, and it's going to have Aaron's rod in it.
And you see, it was budded.
Well, that was to offer proof to the sons of Israel. If I recall correctly, it was to offer proof when it budded. It would have some flowers on it to show proof that Aaron was a descendant of Levi. If I recall correctly, that was the reason that happened to it. I believe you can read more about that in the book of Numbers. But we see that happening. We see two cherubim, you may recall. Two cherubim. Again, the ark is going to look something like this. You're going to have those two cherubim almost in a bowing position, kind of like a bowing position, if not exactly, because you see he describes that the cherubim need to have their faces facing the altar rather than each other. And so it's almost as if they're in a bowing motion, showing they're bowing toward an invisible God. And that's on the mercy seat that we see there. The mercy seat of pure gold, two cherubim. The faces of the cherubim turned downward toward the mercy seat. Mercy seat. And a lot of people want to suggest that the Ark of the Covenant was, with that mercy seat, foreshadowed God's mercy in taking the old law away, because that mercy seat placed on top of the ark is actually going to you might say separate the Ten Commandments from the people in that regard. And so that's one thing that a lot of people think it foreshadows is God in mercy taking the old covenant away, taking the old covenant and separating the Jews from the old covenant. But anyways, we also looked at the table of showbread last week. Table, once again, acacia wood, that strong wood, overlaid with pure gold. Looking at those parts of the verse, that part of that section of the chapter that's underlined, the poles of the acacia wood, overlaid with pure gold. Again, this is going to have a lot of gold. This is going to be some pretty expensive stuff with all this gold. You shall make its dishes and its pans and its jars and its bowls of pure gold. You shall set the bread of the presence on the table before me at all times. Again, the table of showbreads, probably looking something like this on your screens. A lot of people think it may have looked more like that one on the left than the others. And possibly that, I guess, that top right corner. A lot of people, kind of debate a little bit, but they were supposed to put unleavened bread on this on a weekly basis, according to Leviticus. They would change it out every week. And what did Christ say about himself when he was talking about, I guess, bread? What did he say concerning himself and bread? I'm the bread of life. He said, I am the bread of life. And what does that mean that Christ is the bread of life? It means we need to feast on what he taught in his example, in his words. That's the idea there. And I think that's what we're seeing here foreshadowed in this table of showbread. Some people have suggested, and I may not, I may agree, may disagree a little bit on this, but I know one brother who preached years ago. He passed away, I think it was in 2017, but he suggested that the table of showbread foreshadows the Lord's Supper. Now, that may be the case, but there's a little bit of issue I take with that because there's no fruit of the vine with it. There's no grape juice being there with the bread. And so that's one reason why I kind of find it a little bit difficult to think it's foreshadowing the Lord's Supper. Then we also looked last week at the lampstand. This was not going to have any acacia wood. This was going to be of pure gold. Hammered work, it says, of pure gold. A talent of pure gold with all of these utensils. It's going to be, again, it's going to have 7 lights on it. When you look at this idea of this lampstand, this is going to be the only thing in the tabernacle that has light, providing light to the tabernacle. What did Christ say concerning himself in light? He's the light of the world. He said. He would say in John 14, verse 6, I am the way and the truth and the light. And so he is the light of the world. And so I think we really see that the tabernacle, at least with the lampstand, is foreshadowing that, pointing to him in that. Now, again, this is some images of what this may have looked like. We see in Solomon, when Solomon transferred everything from the tabernacle into the temple, he would make 10 lampstands. But when it was not in the temple and it was the tabernacle, it was 7. But what you see, again, 7 lights in that tabernacle. The only lights for providing light to that tabernacle. It was going to be put on one side. You'd have the bread, the table of showbread on one side, and then the lampstand on the other. And then as you're going further into it, you would have the Ark of the Covenant past the veil where the Holy of Holies or most holy place was. And so again, these are just some images. I don't know if it looked like this or not. This is just people's best guess when it comes to this, how that lampstand probably looked. But you keep moving on. We're continuing on now. Exodus 26 now. When you're reading verses 1 through 14, it's describing the curtains of the tabernacle. The curtains, the coverings. Really what a tabernacle is a tent. When I think about it, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, some translations say we long to shed this earthly tabernacle. Some translations say we long to shed this earthly tent. It's talking about our body. But when it's talking about that, it's talking about a tent, a tabernacle. That's what a tabernacle was just a big tent. And this was a special tent set aside for God. And his purpose. In chapter 26, beginning in verse 1, and again, these are just some partial quotations we got on the screen to help us move along, because there's a lot of detail he gives. A lot of detail. He just specifies the measurements, specifies what they need to do in this. But when you look at verse 1 there, moreover, you shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twisted linen. and blue and purple and scarlet material. You shall make them with cherubim. You remember those kind of angel-like beings? If not angels, if they're not angels, they're angel-like. Cherubim, the work of a skillful workman. That first one, you think about those collars. A lot of people say, well, what's so big about these collars, blue, purple, and scarlet material? Well, these are the collars that royalty would typically wear. What was Christ in regards to royalty? What? Great, yeah. He was our king. Someone read for us Matthew chapter 28, verses 18. Let me find that real quick. Matthew chapter 28. Let's actually read verses, excuse me, verses 18 through 20. Matthew 28, verses 18 through 20.
And Jesus came back unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, teaching them to observe all things whether I have commanded you. And I am with you always, even unto the end of your world.
All authority, commanded. What does that show? That shows someone with power, authority. Look at Ephesians chapter 1. Can I get a volunteer to read Ephesians chapter 1, verses 20 through 21?
Which he wrought in Christ when he raised him from the dead and set him at his own right hand of the heavenly.
And so he's set at the right hand of God. It's the idea of him sitting on his throne. And so Christ is king. Jesus is king. And so I think this is really foreshadowing Christ being our king. And then you keep reading on. He says there after the ellipsis points on that screen, he says, then you shall make curtains of goat's hair for a tent over the tabernacle. So these are going to be some kind of curtains over these things. Now, whenever you study the Old Testament, what were goats typically used for? Well, meat, yeah.
Milk.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, meat, milk, at least. Yeah, yeah. You couldn't do that. But when it came to the Old Testament specifically, what were they typically used for? Sacrifice. Exactly. They would be sacrificed. You may remember in Hebrews chapter 10, it says, for it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sin. They were being sacrificed under the old covenant. You can read more of that, especially in Leviticus chapters 1 through 5. But what was Christ for us? He was the ultimate sacrifice for us. Again, foreshadowing Christ's sacrifice on the cross. You look at this next covering now. And after those ellipsis points, the second set there, it says, you shall make a covering for the tent of ram's skins dyed red. What do you think when it comes to the color red? Blood. Blood. Isn't it the blood of Christ that saves us? You come to this next one, and a covering of porpoise skins. It's interesting, porpoise skin. It's an interesting Hebrew word people have been divided over. Some people say it should be porpoise, should be translated seal. Some even say translated badger. Really, the idea is this is a rough skin they're using. When it comes to the Hebrew word, I got kind of a theory about what it might be talking about. Let's say you go into an expensive shop that sells really, expensive furs. And you say, you come in, let's say if Katie and I went in there and said, we would like a fur coat. What? Yeah. Yeah. It could be mink, could be white fox. If I said, yeah, anything but rabbit. Yeah. But yeah, there would be different kinds of, furs that they would have, different kinds of fur coats. There'd be, white fox, silver fox, again, mink. I think there's even different furs that are kind of a cheaper grade out there, like raccoon skins coats. And I don't even know if they still make those anymore. But anyways, you got all those different kinds of coats. But you go into fur, you say fur, and it means different. It could mean a variety of different things. And so my theory, and maybe I'm wrong, because I don't know the Hebrew. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, if you will. I don't know this language as well as, some people do. But when it comes to this word, I'm thinking it's probably a reference to the kind of skin. It could mean porpoise, it could mean badger, it could mean seal, things like that. It could be, a combination of those. But when you look at this particular skin, this is going to be a rough, unattractive looking skin that they're putting over it. Not very something that would be appealing to folks. Very unappealing thing that they're putting on top of it. So the only thing they're going to see when this thing is erected, when this thing is put up, is those skins on top. If someone invades the Jewish land and this tabernacle's erect and everything, that's all they're going to see if they go into the courtyard. They're going to be like, well, this isn't anything to shout about. This is just a big tent over here. Big, unattractive, ugly looking tent. Well, someone read for us Isaiah chapter 52, or excuse me, 53 and verse 2. Talks about, this is actually a prophecy concerning Christ, Isaiah 53 and verse 2.
For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him.
Think about that. That's saying that Christ was not, was not very appealing in appearance, especially in terms of royalty. They'd be thinking, really? This is our king? This guy that looks like this is our king? So he didn't have that kind of appearance. And so I think when it's talking about this form of this covering of porpoise skins, showing that it's a foreshadowing of Christ having that same unappealing look. And so and yet underneath all of it, there's blood. There's a sacrifice taking place. There's the blood of Christ that's going to cleanse. There's royalty. And so you just think about all that. All of this stuff is foreshadowing, again, the new covenant, things in the new covenant. Really, it says the heavenly things, I should say. And so that's just something interesting there as you keep reading through this. Any questions or comments? You keep moving on through here. You come to this next section. Again, I'll show what the tabernacle probably looked like here in a second. But in Exodus chapter 26, continuing on and kind of reading different points throughout verses 15 through 29, it says, then you shall make the boards for the tabernacle of acacia wood. And so this is going to be the stuff that holds the curtains up, holds the tent, the whole coverings up. And it says boards for the tabernacle of, again, that acacia wood. This is going to be the wood they use for this. And it says it's going to be standing upright. There shall be 2 tenons for each board, fitted, notice that, fitted to one another. Thus you shall do for all the boards of the tabernacle. You shall make 40 sockets of silver under the 20 boards. Then you shall make bars of acacia wood. You shall overlay the boards with gold, and make their rings of gold as holders for the bars. And you shall overlay the bars with gold. Again, this is all the stuff that's going to be fitted together to hold up everything. This is just like a tent. Again, you got to have, today there's like plastic and stuff like that, but this is kind of like that, but wood, acacia wood, overlaid with gold. And using these sockets of silver, this thing is going to be fitted together, basically. Put together, fitted together. Where do we read of something being fitted together in the New Testament? Turn over to Ephesians. Someone read for us Ephesians chapter 4 in verse 16.
From whom the whole body fitly joined together, compacted by that which in every joint supplies, according to the electrical workings of the measure of every part, Maketh increase the body into the edifying for itself in love.
So we see there in Ephesians 4:16, talking about the church being fitted together. Think about that. It's interesting. It even calls in 1 Timothy chapter 4 the church the pillar and support of the truth, verses 15 through 17. It's interesting when you think about that. And then you have these boards fitted together, and they're going to be holding up the coverings, the royal collared curtains with the cherubim images in them. It's going to have the goat's hair, foreshadowing Christ's sacrifice. The blood, the ram's skins dyed red, foreshadowing Christ's blood. The porpoise skins, foreshadowing Christ's appearance. All of that. It's going to look like something like this. And again, this is a person's kind of modeling. This is more of a model than art, than the work of uh, painting. Really, it's not really a painting. It's a model, kind of. If I recall, it's kind of like a little paper model. But you can kind of see what this thing might have looked like. You have that again, that linen with those special different royal collars in it on that far left, and then you're going to have the goat's hair that actually goes over that. And then you're going to have the ram's skin dyed red there that's going to go over that. And then you're going to have the badger skin, which goes over that. This is going to be completely covered with that badger, porpoise, seal skin, that particular rough skin. And so you see all that. You can kind of see some of those boards there a little bit underneath, right there underneath the linen a little bit, that, overlaid with gold and everything. But other than that, it's going to be people are only going to see that rough skin on top.
Johnny,
Yes.
on my Bible, it says in Ephesians, it's called shittim. So there must be another name for the Ephesian wood.
That probably is another name for it. Yeah.
Tim.
Yeah, I'd have to look more into that, but they may have, again, sometimes English words change with time. The King James was written in 1611 or put out by 1611 anyways. And so, it probably just an old way of saying acacia.
Tabernacle.
Yeah.
Standing up.
Yep. Yep, exactly. And so it's probably, yeah, like you said, another word for acacia taking place there. But yeah, what we see there, all of this, the tabernacle being held up by those pieces of wood that are fitted together. And the church is the pillar and support of the truth. I just find that kind of interesting as we're going through this. All of this foreshadowing, all of this stuff in the Old Testament foreshadowing the new in so many different ways, foreshadowing the heavenly things, foreshadowing Christ specifically. You just keep moving on through this passage. You see so much. For example, there's going to be a veil in chapter 26 as we continue on, verse 31 through 32, looking at different sections from those verses on the screen. It says, "You shall make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet material." There's those royal collars again. "And fine twisted linen. It shall be made again with cherubim." So this is going to be looking like the that first layer there. This is going to look like the first layer of those coverings. And it says, "The work of a skillful workman, you shall hang it on 4 pillars of acacia overlaid with gold. Their hooks also being of gold on 4 sockets of silver. Excuse me. You shall make a screen for the doorway of the tent of blue and purple and scarlet material." Again, the royal collars. "And fine twisted linen and the work of a weaver. You shall make 5 pillars of acacia wood for the screen and overlay them with gold. Their hooks also being of gold, and you shall cast 5 sockets of bronze for them." And so basically this might have, just kind of looking back, what you have is 2 different kind of curtains taking place. You have this one you can kind of see on the outside when you're from the left hand, if you look past the linen, Coming over to the left, you see 5 pillars right there. That's what the outside is going to look like. Then you come over here, you have this other veil that's that's going to come up. Actually, you see it on the left side. This is going to be the inside of the tabernacle. You see, of course, you see the Ark of the Covenant there on that one side. That they wouldn't come in that side. They would come in from the right, as you see on the screen, and they would come in. And you got that table of showbread. You got that lampstand, the golden lampstand. You got the altar of incense, which is going to come up. And you see that screen there between the altar of incense and the Ark of the Covenant. And there's 4 poles there. And then you have the special veil right there on it. And so that's an artist's kind of idea of what this might have looked like. But when you think of the veil here, the veil is an interesting thing. It shows that there was only one way to get to the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant was where the glory of God was, meaning there was only one way to get to the glory of God. Now, what did Christ say about himself concerning the word way? I am the way
The truth and life.
and the truth and the life. So we see right there, the way. So the veil foreshadows Christ. And really, that might even be showing a foreshadowing of Christ's flesh. Turn over to Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. Hebrews chapter 10. Can someone read for us verses 19 through 20? Hebrews 10, 19, and 20. He's been talking about the sacrifices that took place under the old covenant for several chapters in Hebrews by this point. But just a lot of talking about that. But verse 19, can someone read for us Hebrews 10, verses 19 and 20?
Having therefore, brethren, boldness to enter into the holiest by the blood of peace, by a new and living way which he hath consecrated for us through the veil that is to slay his flesh.
His flesh. Now I want you to see this. Who remembers what happened to that veil in the New Testament when it was transferred over to the temple? Ripped in two from top to bottom. Artist rendering of what that might have looked like when it happened. Ripped, torn in two from top to bottom. I think this really, when the veil was torn in two, I think it's pointing to 4 different things. You have the death of Christ. Again, that veil foreshadowing Christ's flesh. When it's torn in two, that's when Christ died. The end of the separation between God and man took place. Can someone read for us Ephesians? Actually, let's just go ahead and turn over there. Ephesians chapter 2. Ephesians chapter 2. I want you to see this. Ephesians chapter 2. I want you to notice with me verses 12 and 13. It says in Ephesians 2, beginning in verse 12, remember that you were at that time separate from Christ, excluded from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. Ephesians 2, verse 13 now. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were formerly afar off have been brought near. How? By the blood of Christ. And so that when that veil was torn in two, that showed an end of separation between God and man. That, again, remember, the glory of God was right there with the mercy seat. Now, of course, by Christ's, by the not second century, the 1st century AD, course, we see that people go in and the Ark of the Covenant's not there when they were going to ransack the temple. That is, when everything was transferred to the temple. But the glory of God was supposed to be there in the Holy of Holies, the most holy place. That veil separated everyone else from the glory of God. Now the veil is torn in two from top to bottom. There's no longer a separation, is the idea. Also, I think it shows the end of the old law. You see, you even see in Colossians 2, verses 13 and 14, that the old law was nailed to the cross. And so let's actually just read that real quick. Colossians 2, 13 and 14, it says, when you were dead in your transgressions and the uncircumcision of your flesh, he made you alive together with him, having forgiven us all our transgressions, having canceled out the certificate of debt consisting of decrees against us, which was hostile to us. That's the old law right there. And he has taken it out of the way. Concluding verse 14, it says, having nailed it to the cross. Also, we're seeing all of this, the death of Christ taking place, end of the separation between God and man, the end of the old law, and the end of the glory of God in the temple. I mean, the Jews, they could have just walked right behind that curtain whenever they wanted to. You were only supposed to do it once a year. Only the priest was supposed to go back there once a year, the high priest. But they could have just done it whatever, because the glory of God was no longer there when Christ died. Any questions or comments on any of this? Again, a lot of things pointing to Christ as we're going through these different things. Again, a lot of foreshadowing taking place. A lot of things pointing to Christ. You keep moving on. Here's the you actually come to 27 verses 1 through 8. This starts talking about the bronze altar. The bronze altar, you have two different kinds of altars here. You have the altar of incense, which will be in the tabernacle, and then you're going to have a bronze altar outside. The altar of incense was for burning incense. The altar that's outside the tabernacle, in the courtyard, this is going to be made of bronze, and this is going to be for all the animal sacrifices that take place. In chapter 27, looking at verses 1 through 18, again, this is, again, what's on the screen is what we're reading, and we're just looking at these different sections from it. It says, and you shall make the altar of acacia wood. Again, that very firm, hard wood that they're going to make the tabernacle with. 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. The altar shall be square, and its height shall be 3 cubits. You shall make its horns on its 4 corners. Its horns shall be of one piece with it, and you shall overlay it with bronze. You shall make poles for the altar, poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with bronze. And so what's outside, it's not going to be gold, it's going to be bronze. All the gold and silver, there's I think a few exceptions to the silver. Some of the silver will be outside, but all the gold's going to be inside the tent, the tabernacle. And so it says poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with bronze. Its poles shall be inserted into the rings, so that the poles shall be on the 2 sides of the altar when it is carried. This is going to be a very heavy thing. Especially when you look at the description of the cubits, if you wanted to, kind of go through more of that in depth. But this is basically what this image on the screen is basically kind of what it looks like. It may have looked more like the top and the top left and that bottom when it was first made, but as it aged, it probably looked more like that top right corner as it went on. But this is just kind of an idea of what it may have looked like. You're going to have those horns on the side. It's an interesting event that took place in the Old Testament. You read about one of the commanders of David who was needing to be executed, but so that way he could try and escape. He ran into the temple and grabbed the horns because he thought he could find security in those, and he couldn't. Now, of course, those horns represented security. It represented other things. But I did want to ask this question, kind of before we get into that. But when we're looking at the altar itself, what took place on that altar? Sacrifices, animal sacrifices, sacrifices for sins. The ones that were made for unintentional sin, and the one that took place yearly for actual sin. That would take place, and it says, again, what is Christ in terms of sacrifice? He's the ultimate sacrifice for us. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 1 and 2, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved you, and gave himself up for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. He offered himself up as a sacrifice, the ultimate sacrifice for us. Whenever it came to horns, though, it's interesting. Leviticus 4, verse 7 talks about how they would smear blood from some of the sacrifices onto those horns. We're looking at Leviticus chapter 4 and verse 7. Once we get through the altar, the bronze altar, we'll conclude tonight. But I do want to look at, kind of finish this up on the bronze altar. There in Leviticus chapter 4 and verse 7, get my pages to stop sticking together. Verse 7 says, the priest shall also put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense. Now, this was the altar of incense. But it also says, which is before the Lord in the tent of meeting, and all the blood of the bull he shall pour out at the base of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the doorway of the tent of meeting. And so really that blood would be on the altar of incense. I'd have to look again. I thought I read somewhere about it being in also on this altar, but I might be wrong on that. But either way, the death of Christ. Think about this. The bronze altar is going to have that sacrifice on, and the death of Christ had a lot of. It was the ultimate sacrifice, as we said. It made it possible for us to be saved. It was a powerful sacrifice. Lord willing, we'll continue more on the horns, and once we get into the altar of incense, we'll talk a little bit more about the horns on that altar. I got the two mixed up here. But the horns on the altar of incense, those are going to get smeared with blood when the sacrifice is made. And horns, they often represented peace and security. Well, maybe not necessarily peace, but security and victory, which is one of the reasons why David's commander, when he was needing to be executed, King David's commander of his army, when he was going to be executed, he fled and he grabbed the horns here of this altar. So I just want to make that point. Any questions or comments on that?
Well, this chapter 4, when I'm reading, it mentioned a bullock. What is it?
I'd have to double check the King James, but I believe that's talking about a bull. The old way of saying a bull. I might be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it's talking about.
They used on it.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yep, they had to throw those bowls on there, and who knows how often these priests, got a break from it, because people would be coming in. We're going to look at this at some point in the next few studies, either next week or the following week. But you had all kinds of offerings that were taking place. And several of them required a bowl. Matter of fact, whenever the high priest offered a sacrifice for himself, he had to offer a bowl. He couldn't just do a goat or a lamb or some kind of substitute for that. It had to be a bull.
We're reading on verse 11. It said,
oh yeah,
skin of the bullock, all of its flesh, the head, the legs, innards, and the dung.
Yeah. A lot of stuff there. A lot of disgusting stuff. And the Levites, specifically the priests, saw that every day. But yeah, some of this stuff, it depended on the offering. Sometimes they would take and burn some of it outside the camp. Sometimes they would, what was edible, I guess, to them, they would Actually, it would be fed for the priests. It'd be food for the priests. I mean, the priests, they probably couldn't have a job, if you will, going out and having a job in addition to this. You read in Leviticus, specifically chapters 1 through 5, they probably, whenever someone brought certain offerings that could be eaten, that was probably their meal for, the day, or, maybe, yeah, for the day. And so,
Imagine smell.
oh yeah, it'd be stinking, that's for sure. But yeah, they had to do it just right too. So only certain parts could be sacrificed, certain parts had to be burned outside the camp, certain parts, depending on the sacrifice, were edible. So and we'll see some of that, Lord willing, either next week or the following week. We'll go ahead and conclude there tonight with the bronze altar, and Lord willing, we'll continue on next week, and we'll see some things about the courtyard, the altar of incense, which is going to be inside the tabernacle. You're also going to have a bronze, I believe it's pronounced a laver or laver, something like that. But what it is it's going to be kind of like a big bowl with water in it, so that way the priests could wash themselves. And there's a lot of things there that we're going to see. And some point, I'd also like to talk a little bit about the high priest, because we see things whenever you're reading through that Old Testament. You see some things that the high priest did. I didn't even see this until a couple years ago when I studied this more in depth. But you see the high priest doing something that I think really foreshadows Christ a lot. And Lord willing, we'll either see that a little more in depth next week or the following week. We'll probably, when we come to the high priest, we may read through the entire chapter, just because it's very descriptive when you're reading through the chapter of how the clothing was supposed to look like. He was wearing a whole bunch of stuff. He had stones on him that he would wear in an ephod or tablet thing that would actually keep the uh, that would actually, each stone would represent the children of Israel, one of the tribes of the children of Israel. Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, all the way through those different tribes. But again, just so much stuff to talk about when you're going through this. A lot of people just skip over it. They're like, well, I don't know what it's talking about. And that's understandable. It can be very hard. There's a lot of deep stuff. There's a lot of description given. There's a lot of specifics. God gets very specific in how he wants things done. But when we're going through this, he's very specific. And it all goes to show they needed to follow the pattern. That's what he said. Make sure you follow the pattern. If they decided, well, I like that idea, but I want to do something else, well, that would be going against the pattern. This is good enough. I know he said he wanted 12 stones, but I think we better do 14. And he fought with 14 stones. A cloth tablet with 14 stones. Well, that would be disobedience to the command. It'd be disobedience to what God had specified. But anyways, we'll go ahead and conclude there tonight. I want to thank everyone for your attention. We're running a little bit low tonight, but hey, I'm as long as there's people here, we're going to study. And this is a very good in-depth study, and I'm hopeful that this helps us understand some of these things that we've read about. I'm going to go ahead and move it back here to the very beginning. We'll conclude right there.